It killed the cat. It tempted Alice down the rabbit hole. And now curiosity is taking over the world of learning. But is it just another L&D buzzword? We ask a CLO who was in charge of 300,000 learners what curiosity means to him. Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
Welcome to the 6th season of The Learning Hack. I can't believe we're up to 6 already, and we have a great guest for you on this first episode of season 6. But first, some news of the seasonal competition we set you before Christmas from our head of fact and seasonal competitions, Kate Fitzgerald.
Hack facts.
Welcome back. In case you've forgotten, the idea of the competition was to share with us what else it is you do while listening to the podcast, with a prize going to the most bizarre story. We deliberated long into the night over your tales of listening while ironing, commuting, running and walking the dog, but decided in the end that no one had a more unusual story than the person who inspired it in the first place, Sarah Ratcliffe, who listens to us while washing her mucky ponies. So Sarah, there's a bottle of champagne on its way to you.
Well done, Sarah. We laughed till we were hoarse.
Rein it in.
On another tack, we'll also shortly be commencing the next season of our sister podcast, Great Minds on Learning. The Assessors comes out next Monday, 31st of January. Don't miss it. Meanwhile, here's Kate to tell you about the really interesting guest we have to kick off this new season of The Learning Hack.
Stefaan van Hooydonk is founder of the Global Curiosity Institute and co-founder and dean of the Earth Academy. Originally from Belgium, Stefaan has lived, worked and studied all over the world. In a learning career spanning 3 decades, he has held numerous leadership roles in large companies. As Chief Learning Officer at Cognizant, he was in charge of L&D for 300,000 people. Last June, he published the Curiosity Manifesto.
So, Jay Curtis, Head of Themes. What did we talk about?
No surprise that the big theme was curiosity, John, but I got the sense you were quite sceptical about that as a topic area initially.
Completely sceptical. Here comes another big, meaningless, abstract noun, I thought to myself.
But Stefaan won you round, I think.
Pretty much.
You certainly probed the subject in a bit of depth. Individual curiosity, corporate curiosity, and the interesting question of whether curiosity is unequally distributed in organisations.
We're all curious, but not everybody gets the chance in a work environment to really pursue their curiosity. Stefaan thinks that has to change. Curiosity, he says, lies at the root of innovation. And as such, it holds the keys to an organisation's success in the modern world. Stefaan Hooydonk, welcome to The Learning Hack, and thank you for giving your time today for this first episode of the 6th season of the podcast. Seems amazing we're up to 6 seasons. In your career, you've been Chief Learning Officer for some very large multinational corporations, Philips, Nokia, Agfa, Cognizant. And at Cognizant, you were responsible for the learning and development of some 300,000 people. On the face of it, that seems like an absolutely mind-boggling task. So my first question is, how do you actually do the job of L&D on that sort of scale, in 100 words or less?
I was used to big companies, but I was never used to a company of 300,000 people when I joined Cognizant. I didn't even know that the world was still making companies that big. But of course, coming into such an organization, one of the questions is, how am I going to touch 300,000 people? Because as a learning and development or a chief learning officer, your role is to make people better. So I think, if I distill my experience from there, I think a couple of things stand out. First of all is focus on culture. Trying to reach 300,000 people, you'll never be able to reach every single person, but you can focus on the culture. And the learning culture specifically. So what I tried to do there was to almost tweak the learning culture and tweak the overall culture of the company to move towards to an environment where we're enabling people and people could enable themselves rather than in this kind of more traditionalist Frederick Taylorist approach of mandating and pushing learning and those type of things. So it's giving the environment for people to be free to learn, to be open to learn. We had this slogan, open, wonder, learn. And that was all we kind of did lots and lots of marketing around it, and we try to embed it in every manager discussion, in many different ways. That it's all about open, wonder, learn. And if you stick out your neck yourself, dear employee, to open, wonder, then you will learn and you will get on with life and you'll make a career and you'll be happy and things like that. So Cognizant is an IT company, and the world, I realized very quickly, the world was going way too fast for me to control it all, because every half year there was something like 3,000 different computer languages coming out. So for me as a learning group, to try to kind of manage it all, it was just way too hard. So what we tried to do very early on is more create the environment, create the culture, and then let it go, and then step out of the way and learning happen by itself. And so I was focusing much more on the pull side of learning versus the push side of learning. And also kind of part of this culture for me was, if you have the knowledge, do share it with others. I often talked about the difference or the complementarity between consuming learning and contributing to learning. Often I was saying I'm the proud owner of 300,000 trainers, because everybody's got something interesting to say to at least one other person. So my question then to myself and my team was, how do we create an environment to really enable those people to share their knowledge through tooling and other things? So that focus on culture is really important. Another thing maybe is create capability academies, create really niche environments where close to business to drive learning, where business was seeing us as part of them, and not as being kind of this separate entity that sits in some headquarter, that sits in some HR environment, where which is different from themselves. So these are probably some of the key things I tried to focus on, and it was quite successful actually.
It sounds like a lot of what you have to do in dealing with the job at that kind of scale is to do with learner autonomy. You change the culture and you concentrate on people, user-generated content and so on. It's what the learner can do for themselves, what they can give themselves. And that does lead on to curiosity, which I'd like to talk a bit more about in most of this interview. But initially, before we move on to that, with your impressive level of experience, I guess you would have some useful advice to give to L&D people about one of their major pain points that comes up in surveys again and again, which is talking to the business, making L&D relevant to the business and so on. As a CLO, how do you make L&D feel relevant to your internal clients and stakeholders? How do you get buy-in and credibility with the business? I'm sure a lot of people would like to know your advice on that.
Well, with my team, I was always drumming the drum around three different themes, and I probably this is going to be quite relevant for the audience. First of all, if you're a learning professional, you have to be damn good at your job, and for me, that is, you need to have a theoretical underpinning of what learning is all about, or what cognition is all about, how memory works, how retention works. If you're not good at that, don't even get there. Just saying that my parents were trainers or teachers or I love people is not just good enough anymore. So you create the credibility. If you want to work in the legal department or in finance or in marketing, you need to have a degree. You need to prove that you're good at the theoretical side of things. So that one, what was the first thing I always encouraged my people, and we did lots of internal training programs on getting our learning and development colleagues up to speed on the science of learning, really. The second thing was what I was telling to my people is never go to a meeting unprepared, and prepare yourself with data. The more you're in tune with data, the more the conversation is what you could probably call in transactional analysis terms an adult-adult relationship, an adult-adult meeting, where you're talking together as equals. If you don't prepare yourselves, and if you don't have data, for instance, of what happened last year with that group or that manager's group, or we invested so much money into your team and look how much money we got out, or did the needle get moved, yes or no? If you have those data, the discussion goes really well. If you don't have that data, you always end up leaving the meeting with a long list of wishes. And often what learning and development people are talking to is people that are senior to themselves. I was speaking to my CEO, and my people would be talking to heads of businesses or heads of HR type of people. So you're ending up anyway with this difference in hierarchical level. So if you don't go with data and all kind of data, for instance, we trained so many thousand people last year, and the billing rate changed, yes or no? Question. And if you have the data to prove that the billing rate changed because of the trainings that you're done, or that there's a better engagement score or something, then you have a discussion, and then you can really focus on the important things, rather than the things that are just top of our head, because so okay, that's the second part. Use data, and the third dimension I try to always encourage my teams is we shouldn't see ourselves as a support group. We should behave as a co-creator of the future. Again, be an adult amongst adults, and don't be a child among parents in the transactional analysis analogy. And those three dimensions, I think, is very important. First of all, step up. Have that credibility, and maybe to continue the analogy with law, that people in the legal department need to have a legal degree. I've never seen anybody go to the legal department and say, "Oh, I want to have a contract, and it has to be 14 chapters and 3 pages." Go ahead and do it. While in the learning environments, very often these senior leaders, by the sheer fact that they also went to school somehow, they think they know about adult learning, and they know about how some business problems has to change into learning or performance or any way. So they almost dictate, do me a 3-day leadership program and off you go, and tell me when it's done. At that moment, the credibility should step in, and the data should come out saying, well, you have a pain point. Great. I know how to deal with that. And I know, and I will feedback, because last year I did something similar and it was successful because the data show us to. Or last year you tried something on me, or you tried something similar on me, it didn't work, and here's the data that it didn't work. So maybe it's better for you to start listening to me.
Now I'd like to get on to curiosity. Most recently, you founded the Global Curiosity Institute. Curiosity is a word we hear everywhere in learning at the moment. I've got to admit, I was a bit cynical when it first started to be talked about a lot, because I thought, oh, here's another big abstract noun we're all going to have to use every time that we do a presentation. But I've kind of gradually become less cynical and become convinced. But I think I need you to put the cap on my conviction about that. You talk knowledgeably and engagingly on the subject of curiosity. To start at a very basic place, it does seem to me that everybody is curious. With our shelves being suddenly empty in the local supermarket, for instance, we've all got curious about supply chains, how supply chains work, in a way that perhaps we never were before the pandemic. With climate change, householders in low-lying areas are suddenly very curious about rainfall patterns. For instance, in the local area, am I going to get flooded? Is my house going to go down in value? And it seems to me our curiosity tends to be driven by very immediate needs of ourselves and our loved ones. And I guess you could bring Maslow's hierarchy into that. Yeah. But it feels like you're talking about a sort of higher order of curiosity when you talk about curiosity in the context of learning. Can you pin down exactly what you mean by curiosity in this context?
Beautiful question. Let's take one step back. I think curiosity is something that we all take for granted. It's a word, like what you spoke about yourself. It's one of those words that we take for granted, and that's the end of it. Yet, what I've set up now, the Curiosity Institute a year and a half ago, and the more I'm starting to research curiosity and read about curiosity, the more I'm starting to unravel these different aspects of curiosity, and it's actually quite exciting. Now, the type that you mentioned about supply chain and the weather is actually a notion that researchers call deprivation sensitivity. It's a way that you are deprived of some information, of some knowledge, and that that gets you going to find out what the solution is. Marketeers, for instance, use the same notion when they talk about information gap theory, and they often use it in advertising. This or that famous person has found this miraculous way to make money. Go and help. Go and find out what it is. Or 2 products left. Or other people have bought the same book and bought something more. So there's this notion of other people might know something, and that sets you going. So what you mentioned is actually part of curiosity. What you see also in the research, that people are really good at this type of curiosity, because that's not the only type. They tend to be really good at problem solving, better than other people, because these people might be looking at something and suddenly say, "Whoa, what do I do with this?" And they might not, almost kind of proverbially, they might not sleep until they found the solution. It's like Thomas Edison, who needs to go through hundreds of different types of materials to figure out how the filament of an incandescent light bulb works. So now, my own definition of curiosity is the intentional mindset to challenge the status quo, explore, discover, and learn. And already you see the intentionality and the mindset and challenging status quo, but learning very importantly featured in there. In the context of learning, I think you will agree with me that curiosity is an important spark to get learning going, to get passion going, to get, if you're bored in a lecture or in a podcast, you're not going to remember a lot. You're not even going to bother to continue listening, you know? Mm-hmm. So learning and curiosity is really key. Now, sometimes I'm asking myself how much, and then linking to the learning and development organizations and groups, how much is learning and development supporting this curiosity? How much are we creating curiosity in the solutions, in the services that we're creating? Are we sparking this? And maybe some of the opportunities for L&D, therefore, could be maybe indeed help with creating more pull versus push, because push is a function of compliance. And for me, the opposite of curiosity is conformity or compliance. So are we pushing people into conformists, or are we pushing people into being curious about themselves, about the world and others? I'm defining curiosity at one level deeper as the intersection between 3 dimensions. It's curiosity about the world. Yeah.
Just come in there. That seems like an extremely contentious statement in the context of training and the training business, to say that curiosity is the antithesis, did you say, of compliance? Compliance accounts for a huge amount of learning that's given in organizations, surely.
That's true. Now, if that compliance is something that you need to do structurally as an organization. Learning is something that happens to drive the business forward. Compliance is a step that you need to take to make sure, because otherwise you can't be in business. If you're in the healthcare industry, you need to do a number of compliance things. If you're in North America, you have sexual harassment type of things, and depending on your geography and your industry, you need to do something. But that's not really learning. That's solving a compliance issue. And what I'm talking about, not necessarily at the learning and development opposite between curiosity and compliance, is that there's a difference between exploration and exploitation. That comes from the strategic dimension. Exploitation is always looking at the past and perpetuating and making scalable something that you've invented in the past. And you see that in the 20th century, we've been really good at this. Look at, for instance, an Eastman Kodak. Mr. Eastman, he invented something at the end of the 19th century, and for 100 years he was able to run with it. He didn't have to explore anymore beyond that initial driver. Nowadays, companies cannot afford not to explore anymore. And the point I'm trying to make is that if we're not careful, then companies will follow that suit. And you see that already with the shrinking life cycle of organizations. In the 1950s, it was still around 64 years. Now it's about double. It's about 15 to 20 years that companies are surviving nowadays. So let me come back to the opportunity for L&D. First of all, encouraging pull. That's a really important one, I think. Secondly, an important one is also think about training people on curiosity. Think about training people on mindsets. I think that's a beautiful opportunity for learning and development. We've been focusing so much in the past on focusing what I call primary skills and secondary skills. Primary skills means core business skills. You need to know how to operate a machine. You need to know how to sell your products. And that's supporting a business in its core processes. Secondary skills is all about leadership, is how to be a professional and show up as a professional. Tertiary skills or meta skills is about mindsets, training people growth mindset, training people curiosity. A lot of us in learning and development are shying away from this. And often we blame it on recruitment. Well, these people aren't curious enough, or these people are not engaging enough, and finding new people, not realizing that actually curiosity is also something that you can improve upon. It's like a muscle. And then the third thing, I think, an opportunity for L&D, I already spoke about it, use data and be curious around data that you can use towards driving things differently. So there's quite a number of things that if learning and development people or CLOs are embracing the concept of curiosity, there's many things they can do with it.
The way we work has changed, and the way we learn is changing too. But 70% of organisations don't feel that their learning systems can really cope with all this change. It seems there is a disconnect between what learners need right now and what most learning suites provide. In a new white paper, Ben Betts and I tell the story of how this disconnect happened and lay out a vision for what a modern learning system ought to be and do. It's called Sweet Dreams, and you can read it now.
Meet the evolving nature of work with Cornerstone Explore, a holistic people growth experience that delivers a fully integrated, personalised journey of learning, skill development and career mobility for every person. I'd share all the ways Cornerstone Explore is designed and personalised for the ways your people want to grow and work, but this is only a 30-second ad. To learn how you can unite people growth with business success, visit csod.info/future-ready.
You've spoken about algorithms coming up to the 21st century and how they can be bad for curiosity. Can you talk a bit about that? We're all caught up in this web of algorithmic attention manipulation, which is constantly monkeying with our curiosity. I just had something flash up on my computer screen about John Bonham, the drummer with Led Zeppelin, and suddenly thought, ooh, and for a second, almost deviated from my focus on the interview. You could say it's the fuel the whole engine runs on, this constant distraction. And so that kind of our curiosity is part of the engine, is the fuel that drives this engine. So what is the danger that we need to recognize there? And how can we get back a bit of control?
It's a great question. I'll come to the notion of awareness in a second and self-awareness. The algorithms or internet is one of the potential barriers to curiosity. I often talk about this intrinsic barriers. So the barriers that come from within yourself could be anxiety, could be stress, it could be overconfidence, could be arrogance, and so they have a number of internal dimensions. Algorithms fits in the list of external barriers to curiosity. And that's together with having the wrong role models. For instance, having a manager that's not really supporting or is looking over your shoulder and is stifling curiosity. Algorithms is one of them. Now, internet is probably the biggest invention of the last century. And internet is such a beautiful tool to, on the one hand, explore the world. Yet on the other hand, it's also a great tool to be entertained. Let's call it entertainment. So for people to just go with the flow, and often people talk about the internet rabbit hole. You start with a question, and then 3 hours later, you're still on the internet, not realizing anymore what the initial question was, and you're still there. So that's not really the intellectual pursuit or intellectual exploration that you're getting into. So there's probably a distinction that we have to make before I continue talking. There's a difference between productive and unproductive curiosity. And I'm talking about curiosity in the workplace. You could also use that in the private sphere, but let's talk about productive. Productive is curiosity which starts with a question, has discipline in the pursuit, and has a clear goal. I want to solve something. I want to learn a new language, and I'm putting in the time and the effort to learn it and get there. Unproductive curiosity is the opposite. Something is missing, like the rabbit hole exercise. You're not reflecting. You don't have a goal. There's no discipline, or you're using it to kill boredom. Often you're in London. You're in London, no?
Right, very close,
Right.
60 miles
Okay.
from London.
I lived 2 years in London, and it's not only about London; it's in all big cities. If you're in the subway, in the tube, everybody's looking at their smartphone, as if people are not interested anymore in the person sitting next to them, because we want to somehow be entertained by, and some of us are reading, some of us are definitely doing things to increase knowledge, but many people are just killing time while waiting, and so that's a less productive type of curiosity. Gossiping would also be featuring in the less productive curiosity side. Now, social media and algorithms. I think social media and algorithms probably can be easily mentioned in the same sentence. Social media and the algorithms in social media, they really invite people to stay within the same tribe, within the same group, and contain us. So the challenge with curiosity there is that if we're not careful, we're starting to be less interested in what's happening in other tribes, in other groups. And the more we're kind of sucked into that social media, and then the more algorithms are supporting us to sucking us into that group, the more challenges are with things that are not necessarily healthy for individuals or society or for groups. So internet algorithms are beautiful things to help, but they're also kind of dangerous. And self-awareness is really important, to know, having the knowledge to know what you're doing and when you're doing it and what these algorithms are doing to you. We all have the sense of being free agents, and we all think that we're free agents and we're adult and we're rational, but actually we're guided by a lot of internal but also external drivers that we're not even aware of, and algorithms is one of them. Maybe I'll try to pick up one dimension about algorithms too, which is less about social media, which is something that I found in research. And about academics, you would think that after the introduction of internet, researchers would have had more access to research because it's freely available. They don't have to go to the library anymore to look through all these academic journals. They can have access to this. So you would imagine that the citations that they have at the end of their academic papers would be more robust and more varied versus before, because they just have access to more stuff. Now, what we found in research is that it's actually the contrary. With the introduction of internet, the citations are less robust and more narrow. People are more reciting the same articles all over again, rather than inviting new articles. And there's some hypotheses around this is cognitive laziness, that people make a search around something they're researching, and it would just go for the top 2 or 3 articles that the algorithms again spit out. And suddenly popularity is more important than usefulness. So again, their awareness is really important. The internet is a beautiful tool, but we have to be aware that curiosity is, or that the algorithm is something that can help us or can also detract us.
I think it's interesting there. You were making me think of another one of your interests, I think, which is mindfulness. I mean, perhaps within this environment, what we have to do is to be very conscious of how we use our attention, and mindfulness meditation, whatever else you think about it, can be quite useful in that, in monitoring what is going on in your head. Because so often you kind of, in your interactions with internet and social media, I find you think, well, why is it showing me this? And then if you think about it, you realize, well, it's because I always look at this. I shouldn't necessarily look at this. I shouldn't necessarily be interested in all these stories about film stars, but actually this stuff, when it crops up, snags my attention, even though I'm not conscious of being the sort of person that is like that. So a degree of mindfulness perhaps is something that can help you with controlling your curiosity and directing it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Actually, I have 3 applications of curiosity, and mindfulness is a third one. Or let's start with it as a first one, is curiosity about yourself. How much are you interested in your deeper drivers, in your values, in your purpose, in the unconscious and conscious drivers of why you say the things you say, why you think, why you're triggered to look at this specific internet message? Another dimension for me of curiosity is empathic curiosity. How interested am I in other people? Especially nowadays in the workspace, it's all about teamwork. It's not anymore about what I'm doing. It's how I figure how I show up in a team. And the third dimension is what we more traditionally refer to as curiosity, is curiosity in the world. It's cognitive curiosity. How interested am I in the things around me? And that's the exploration. So what I've noticed is the more people are self-aware, the more they can also show up more curiously in the other 2 dimensions. And an interesting dimension, when I've got now 3,000 plus people who've done my diagnostic. I've got this free diagnostic online. And the more senior people are, they are really high on empathic curiosity as well as cognitive curiosity, but they tend to be quite lower than other people on self-reflective curiosity, or the third dimension of curiosity. And that's kind of a dangerous trend, I think, that if people are really at the summit of their careers and are in high level positions, it's important for them to be self-aware and to know what their limitations are, because otherwise we're up for a dangerous propositions, of course. Interestingly, that some companies are starting to tweak their leadership development programs towards being more inwardly focused rather than externally. In the past, leadership development programs was all about, let's learn a bit about production, learn a bit about kind of marketing, learn a bit about leadership, learn about the external world. But some of these companies are now starting to say, let's go internal. Let's find out who you are as a person, your values, your purpose, your deeper self. And mindfulness and meditation suddenly features in there as a new thing that is, I think, beautifully introduced into the world of learning and development nowadays.
There's some INSEAD research you point to that says 83% of leaders say yes, our organization allows for curiosity, but only 50% of non-execs would say the same, which seems to indicate that curiosity, or the permission to be curious, is rationed in organizations. This puts me in mind of what happened to leadership learning, which used to be the preserve of the top 10% fast track programs. And then some organizations started at some point around the turn of the century, perhaps, or earlier, late 20th century, started saying, no, team leaders in call centers need it too. And all points in between, that Napoleon saying about every corporal has a field marshal's baton in their knapsack, and so on. A more democratized idea of what leadership was about came about, and that's far more widespread now. Is there a model we can follow there in democratizing curiosity, if indeed curiosity you would agree is rationed in organizations? And also, I'd turn that question on its head. Is this what the whole curiosity movement is about, really? I'm always interested in why these words suddenly become popular. Is this the next stage in the democratization of corporate culture, or is that a bit too tendentious?
Well, let's start with the last question. I think the 21st century for me is the century of ideas. And I think we've also realized now recently in the COVID experience, we're still in it, that somehow the answers or the solutions of the past are not necessarily fully helping us in driving us towards the future. Some industries are thriving. And some companies within industries are thriving while others are perishing or are barely surviving, type of thing. So somehow the notion of coming up with new answers, coming up with even new questions to some of the answers that we have not identified yet is an important dimension. And more companies and more CEOs, whether they're startups or big scale-ups or big companies, they're starting to realize that we have to start looking at the world differently. And curiosity is just a word, but call it openness, call it humility, call it exploration. They're all relevant. And if you're looking at, for instance, let's compare the Marriott with Airbnb. Marriott took 88 years to amass 650,000 or so beds. Airbnb did 4 years to amass the same type of beds, and they're even bigger in terms of share value or market value than Marriott nowadays. So suddenly, having an idea and having our willingness to rock the boat, to challenge the status quo, to engage in new ways of thinking or putting your thinking upside down, is something that is needed more and more. In the last century, that was less needed. Last century, companies were more conformity driven, because that was the notion of industrial system scalability. You needed to be efficient, and you couldn't have people that were rocking the boat all the time, because that's hard. Now let's come back to the percentages that you've raised. Indeed, when you're asking senior leaders, is your organization curious? Then about 80 plus people say yes, of course. When you're asking the non-leaders, how curious is curiosity enabled in your organization, then only barely 50% of them say yes. So it's an important notion that we all have filters with which we're looking at the world. And this is also a bit dangerous, also for learning and development people, I think. If it's not that the way that I'm looking at the world suddenly is the way everybody else is looking at the world. And I've sometimes had discussions about learning with colleagues. It's not because I'm learning in a certain way, or I prefer to learn in a certain way, that suddenly everybody has to learn in a certain way. Now, you asked a question about changes in culture. I think we could see more, or gradually, a move towards more humanistic organizations. If you're looking at Novartis, for instance, they've adopted unbossed and curiosity as part of their corporate values. And unbossed is all about enabling the employee more and making sure that the boss is not a top-down decision maker, but is more of an enabler of the people. Again, we started off talking about the parent-child drivers. Is the manager a parent? And is the employee a child that is there to be obedient and to listen to what the boss is saying and to show up in the morning and say, boss, what I have to do for the day? Or do both suddenly show up as adults, both responsible and caring and driving things? So you see more and more organizations that are enabling that. And you also could see that now the recent COVID situation with working from home and now the great resignation, as people call, suddenly both employees and employers are starting to realize, do I want this type of work? Do I, and for companies, is this the right way to manage our people? So you see quite a number of trends showing up that people are becoming more focused on culture. That the 20th century, we have been really good in what I talked about earlier, kind of the Kodak way of doing things: efficiency, effectiveness, exploitation. Now it's time to allow for exploration, and exploration requires a different mindset. It's not about either or. Companies need to enable both. Typically, startups are there with they're really high in exploration, at least around the idea that they have. And then as soon as there's some kind of scalability coming into the equation, then it's about exploitation, how to exploit something as well as possible. Now, there's a danger there. Some companies, they suddenly over-focus on that exploitation, and they leave the exploration or the initial exploration outside of the door. And you see now in the 20th century, you need both. You need scalability, but you also need exploring the future, however uncertain that future might be.
That lovely phrase, business as usual, of course. Yeah. You have the innovative stuff, it gets put in. How can we put this into business as usual? When it becomes business as usual, you then need a bit more exploration. But some companies, you're saying, stay stuck in business as usual.
Yeah.
We've talked a bit about individual curiosity and about collective curiosity. I mean, a company can be curious or incurious. And obviously there's a difference there. You're slightly talking about two different things, aren't you? How the individual can become more curious, how the company can be more curious. If a company isn't curious, how can you make it curious? And I think this comes back to L&D talking to the business, I think, and interacting with business. How can a CLO make his or her company more curious? Business tends to be curious about learning for two reasons generally. If something went really well, why did that happen? If you're lucky, they'll look into that. Or if something went really badly, more often, who do we blame for that? And who do we need to retrain? So we can put it in a press release that we've instituted training. I'm being cynical, but I'm guessing you'd say it was more about that. But really, how do you make the business interested in L&D?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think curious people need curious environments to thrive. And initially, I found it a bit strange, and also talking to people, that curiosity is often linked only to the individual and less to the organization, as if individuals show up curiously or not, and then the organization is just there. But what I found is actually organizations have a huge impact, and managers and leaders have a huge impact on how people show up curiously. Now, there's an interesting piece of research done by Francesca Gino from Harvard in a paper that actually already came out in 2018 around curiosity. And she came up with 3 insights, which are, I think, beautiful to share. First of all, curiosity is more important to the profitability of companies than previously thought. Secondly, by making leaders and organizations can tweak their cultures towards more curious environments. And the third thing, which often people find a bit strange, although leaders say they value curiosity, often they stifle it. So if we're now putting ourselves in the shoes of a chief learning officer, I think next to being operationally excellent, which is again the exploration driver, a CLO needs to be damn good at what she's supposed to be doing in the first place, and that's kind of upskilling, performance support. Now, I think CLOs have an extra opportunity, first of all, to be a culture driver and help the organizations to focus on openness, to focus on how the organization views learning. I've seen a lot of companies where learning is seen as non-productive. People are either working or they're in learning, and learning is almost as painful as seeing people go on holidays. It's painful because the manager has to deal with that somehow because there's a disruption in the system. And CLO has the opportunity to tweak the organization that learning is actually not productive time. It's actually part of learning is work and working is learning. I think the examples that you've just raised are really great, that CLOs also could have an opportunity to focus not only in the individual learning piece, but also focus on the organizational learning. Are we doing after action reviews? Can we introduce organizational learning into the equation? Another thing that I think chief learning officers can do is, and I've seen that with a number of companies that I've been helping, start small with curiosity. Maybe benchmark or measure one part of the organization, how well that part of the organization is doing in terms of curiosity, in terms of failure readiness, in terms of do we have role models, how's the learning culture, do we have an innovation culture, those type of different dimensions that you can measure. And that's your baseline then. And prove to the organization that this is really something good. Many, especially big organizations, they're more indeed conformity driven rather than curiosity driven. But I think chief learning officers have such a beautiful and embedded role, but also have enough distance from the rest of the organizations to really make a huge impact. And very practically, just put it on the agenda. as chief learning officer, has the opportunity to tweak the learning programs that we're doing. No, make sure that curiosity is part of onboarding. Make sure that curiosity is part of the leadership agenda, and that every leadership development program has a module about curiosity. I've been working with some CLOs around measuring their own team. How curious are we as a learning and development group, and what can we do about this? Training meta skills, as we talked about earlier, kind of putting that also on the agenda. Do we train people physically on growth mindset, on curiosity, on resilience, and those type of things? I think there's quite a number of things that chief learning officers can do to bridge that organizational and individual curiosity and really shape it. Maybe my last comment would be curiosity, if it's not treated with intentionality, is hard to flourish. Because as human beings or as systems, we're always drawn into this notion of we're looking for routine, we're looking for conformity, because that gives us peace, that gives us peace of mind, that gives us security, that the things of yesterday are still happening the same way as tomorrow, that the toothpaste that we're brushing our teeth with is not poisonous, that because yesterday it was safe, so the fact that it's today also safe gives us peace. So we're all automatically drawn already into this notion of conformity, of predictability, and that gives us kind of easy states of minds. And we need curiosity to pull us away from this, and only intentional curiosity can actually do this. So it's kind of a countermeasure or a counterbalance to kind of to make sure that the elastic is pulled more in the other side, but it requires a bit more power. And that's true for individuals, but that's also true for organizations. We need to put it on the agenda. We need to make it part of our culture. We need to take some intentional measures, and I think CLOs are beautifully placed in the middle of it all to make that happen.
Stefaan, you certainly sparked my curiosity about a number of the kind of subtopics we've covered, and there's those other questions I'd like to ask you. But of course, we can't stretch the elasticity of our listeners' attention too far, or further than the algorithms will allow, for that matter. So lastly, what's the best place for people to follow your thought if they've similarly been inspired to curiosity?
Probably two things. First of all, LinkedIn is always a very good place to. I'm quite active there. I'm also bringing out a book in May around workplace curiosity. It's called the Workplace Curiosity Manifesto, helping to dive even more into the theory, but also the practice of what L&D, what HR can be doing for leaders, for individuals, for teams, and so on. And then go to the website, globalcuriosityinstitute.com. You can also do there I have diagnostics that people can do for free. I've got kind of all my presentations are on there, all the articles I've written. So if people are more interested, then I'll make a link. I'll make sure this podcast is also linked on there once it's live. So that's maybe useful.
Thank you very much. And we'll put all those links in show notes as well. So thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation for me, Stefaan. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to Stefaan and to our sponsors, Learning Pool and Cornerstone. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
Don't miss Great Minds on Learning next week and upcoming episodes here at the Learning Hack on Web 3.0, talking to the business with data and accessibility. Till next time.
Stay curious, learning people.